Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is Clown Underground here. Um, I got some things I want to talk about. Um, I've been here recently, in the past couple months, um, have been watching a lot of the videos from the uh, Nikolas Cruz sentencing trial going on in Parkland, Florida. Um, as we all know, Nicolas Cruz was the shooter in the 2008 Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. And um, some of the things I've been thinking about is just listening to the testimony of victim impact, mostly watching the victim impact statements. I was pretty understanding of how these people felt, in a way of like their distress, frustration, and anger. And I don't want to say hatred towards him, but I would say that they have a lot of distress and anger, very deep sadness. Some of them even severely depressed people um, that were doing their victim impact statements. So I'm really, looking at the case and stuff, and I can see that one of the guys that was, I believe it was Mr. Beagle's father, which is a lawyer out of New York. I liked that victim impact statement from him. Because the way he approached the court was very similar to how he might approach another court in his home state, except the fact that, um, you know, um, you don't want to call a defendant a bastard, an evil bastard in court. Um, so that's the only thing I can really take away from all this is that in a case like as if he was in New York, representing a victim, like as if he was a prosecutor or something in New York, often you'll hear about how lawyers had used to be prosecutors and lawyers now are prosecutors, blah blah blah. But they wouldn't approach the situation as like calling him an evil bastard necessarily. Um, but I think that he handled the situation in kind of in a unique kind of fashion. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, his son was killed at the hands of Nicolas Cruz. Um, Now, the main point I think in this video is I'm going to talk about whether I believe in the death penalty or I believe in life imprisonment for this kind of guy. But um, I'm going to answer that question real quick and then go on to explain why later on. My answer is no, I don't believe in the death penalty for convicted murderers. Um, and I don't believe in the death penalty at all for anybody in the United States. And the problem with that is we lock up way too many people in the United States, and other countries in Europe and other countries around the world. And I'm not saying every country around the world has it has very fair punishment, but our Constitution requires that they do not subject an individual to cruel and unusual punishment. Um, but I would say that it's pretty cruel and unusual punishment in a way to lock somebody up for uh, marijuana violation when for uh, a marijuana or drug violation and give them mandatory minimums. Some states require a mandatory minimum for drug offenses. I'm not saying that drugs are okay for people to do, but I don't think that a mandatory minimum of, like, say, 5 years for drug dealing or 10 years for drug dealing or whatever that the mandatory minimum is for their state um, is appropriate punishment. I think the punishment should be something along the lines of an individual based, looking at all the aggravating and mitigating factors. If they can look at the aggravating and mitigating factors in this case, for the Nicolas Cruz case, then they should be able to look at the aggravating and mitigating factors for nonviolent, like drug offense cases, or nonviolent alcohol-related offenses, such as being arrested for being drunk in public, for example. I guess a cruel and unusual punishment, for example, for drunk in public would be to lock a person up for 30 days in jail. Now that's pretty cruel and unusual punishment. Most cities don't even really mess around with it till they're extremely drunk, and then they might lock them up for 4 hours in the drunk tank and then let them go with a ticket of like $100 or whatever it may be. So let's get back to the point here. I'm still getting off topic. Nicolas Cruz here, you know, and I'm talking about him, and I looked at the mitigating factors, and I looked at all the aggravating factors, based off what was, being shown in the on YouTube, and watching the videos on YouTube and everything. And there's really way too many aggravating factors that could have easily swayed the jury to vote for the death penalty. But there are a lot of mitigating factors that weren't able to be proven to the court, because there just wasn't enough evidence or enough testimony to provide enough information or enough testimony, like I said, to show mitigating factors beyond what the mitigating factors that they were able to prove in the case. And just because you can't prove a mitigating factor or have testimony of a mitigating factor doesn't mean that there's plenty of other mitigating factors out there to sway the jury to vote for life imprisonment. And I'm glad that they voted for life imprisonment for him, because I do empathetically understand in a lot of ways about what has happened to him as a child and what has happened to him as a young adult growing up. I was bullied as a kid too, and before I was 14 when I was bullied really bad, and I've been bullied all my life too. So I've even been bullied as a young adult. I sometimes get bullied these days in my life as a 35-year-old. But I have ways I deal with it. But and he has a lot of mental health issues that should have been addressed when he was growing up, but never did get addressed when he was growing up. So, um, life imprisonment was the right choice in this case. Now, what people don't understand is sometimes you don't as a victim you don't get to make that decision on what's the best or what you would like to see as a person, at that count the outcome of the person who's hurt you. Whether if you was the victim of being shot or whether you're the family member of a victim who has been shot and killed, or you're a friend of a victim that has been shot and killed. Um, you don't get to make those choices as to what happens in a case like this because everything goes to a jury. I really think that what should have happened originally um, is there should have been uh, he took a plea, an insanity plea. I really think that the best option would have been for him to take an insanity plea because here's why that I think that people don't understand about the insanity plea. Um, because even though he would have had to spend the rest of his life being locked up, the conditions of an insanity plea would have been if they were to have found him guilty um, because of being insane, and he would have had to spend the rest of his life at a place kind of like Saint Mary's or uh, Saint Elizabeth's, someplace like that. And the reason why I say the word Saint Elizabeth's Hospital is because um, John Hinckley Jr., when he did an attempted assassination on President Reagan um, back in the early 80s, um, they put him they eventually put him in St. Elizabeth's. I believe that's where the hospital, or yeah, St. Elizabeth. Oh, hiccups real bad. St. Elizabeth's. Um, and what we found out over the years is that, that um, he had gotten so much better over the years that they got to the point where that at his age, in his early 60s now, after they took him off all restrictions, where he's basically a free man to, I guess, to a certain extent, I guess. Um, I don't know if he still has some things he's not allowed to do, but far as what we understand, they lifted all the restrictions on him, and so he's very remorseful and very repentant about what happened, and so what they should have done with Nicholas is they should have should have pushed forward with the insanity defense, an insanity plea. If he could have got an insanity plea and pled guilty but insane, he could have had the opportunity to go to a state or federal psychiatric hospital and probably spend the rest of his life in a pretty cushy kind of environment, much more cushier than state prison is. Because this is a state case, not a federal case, he'll end up going to a state prison maximum security, most likely he will be put in a prison very similar to what Ted Bundy was put in. Um, I believe Ted Bundy went to one of the Florida prisons when he was sentenced. I'm not sure. I think that's where he was executed at, is in Florida. But so what I'm saying here is the jury made the right decision by sentencing him to voting for life in prison. And I explained a little bit about why that was the right choice. And I'm going to say to the victims, like I said before, you don't get to make that choice on what happens to the perpetrator. That's all up to the jury, and ultimately the judge can actually, if she wanted to, she could have went ahead and disagreed and went and what they call objection to what the jury's recommendation. Very rarely in a case does a judge object to whatever the jury has decided. Now, there's a thing where they call a hung jury. Now, a hung jury is interesting because basically a hung jury is, I can't really explain it in really eloquent ways, but they're talking about a mistrial. And sometimes when that happens, they may have to retry the case over again. But that's what would happen in a hung jury or a mistrial, one of the two. So, like I said, I really don't know a whole lot about hung juries. I can say that when you got a hung jury, that means that, in a way, that the case is not going to proceed forth with an adequate result, which means you got to retry the case again, um, you know, that sort of thing. And that's what sucks about that. If you're, a lawyer or a prosecutor, because you want to get this um, person sentenced and get them up and out the door and send them off to prison or send them off to wherever they're going to go to. So, like I said, the victims don't have much of a choice in the fact about what happens in this situation, and they were really upset that they didn't get what they wanted. And I'm, you know, I understand their anger and their hate and their anguish, whatever they're feeling. But you have to look at it from the right perspective. And the right perspective is we don't get to make the choice as victims to whatever is going to happen to the perpetrator. And I found that out years ago with the things that have happened to me. Is justice is not always just. It's just not. Your version or your feelings of justice is never just to you. It's only just to what the information and the judge as what they feel should be the best outcome. And the jury was the one who made the decision, and I'm glad that they made that decision to let him go spend the rest of his life in imprisonment, because as a country about cruel and unusual punishment, for example, and it goes against our Constitution, that if more cases would get to a point where they would not sentence a person to death, and we could get to a point where we could abolish the death penalty altogether, our nation will get a whole lot better if we offer, in the criminal justice system, we offer treatment services and help for a lot of these people who are on that wretched road of destruction. Um, because there's a lot of folks out there that end up, after 20 years of being in and out of trouble with the police and stuff, they end up doing something pretty bad, and they end up killing 2 or 3 people as a result of either drugs or violence or anger or hate or bigotry or over fighting over a woman or whatever that may be, and they end up escalating to that point, and they end up or looking at a life sentence because they got a triple homicide that they're dealing with. If they could have helped the person way before the person had got to that point, then that person could have turned their life around if services were provided when they needed to be provided. In this case, this is a good example because if services were provided to Nicolas Cruz way before he ever did this or ever thought about doing this, and put him in treatment programs and things, I think that they could have detoured him from doing such things like this, and he could have had a pretty reasonable kind of life and a reasonable kind of outcome of maybe being able to get his GED and going to college. And I understand. Let's go to another part of this. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is I understand empathetically about Nikolas Cruz's rage against the school. I'm going to talking about whether it's injustice. And this goes back to what I'm saying about injustice that has happened to all of us. And the injustice that Nikolas Cruz endured that caused him to be so angry at the school was the fact that most schools are set up in a way to teach children who have a standardized IQ of, like, say, in between 90 to 110 IQ level. Most schools are not set up in the kind of way that would have been able to help Nikolas Cruz when he was going to school. And so there was a lot of things that he did as a result of his mental health problems that caused them, as administrators and teachers and principals, that to where they decided that he was not appropriate or functioning or functional or efficient for their agenda. And their agenda is to safety and security and helping children who do want to learn and who have the mentality to learn and who are not dysfunctional, that need adequate one-on-one attention, to help them succeed. I think what really should have happened is they should have really helped him a long time ago before he ever got to this point and put him in a special school. They do have schools for people who have the kind of mental problems that he has. But that was, I looked at it and I'm like, you add up all the mitigating factors that were testified to, and I liked how the one neighbor came up there and testified and said, well, I saw him, came out there with a toy gun or a BB gun, and he was walking around and the way that they described how he was walking around. And he felt kind of afraid that his car might get shot up with BBs or whatever. Um, so, and it made him scared, but I think that his testimony really helped in a way. I mean, people say it didn't help, but um, all I have to say about, things here is that the victims just don't really get it. What I mean by they just don't get it is that they don't understand that justice is not always just, and justice is not always fair, and and I know that from experience because um, I've had people steal. I've had people who have stayed here at my apartment and who have stolen off of me, and I've called the police before, and the police told me that there's nothing that they can do about it. Well, um, that's not justice. But what we got to also understand is that um, sometimes um, God has a way of getting um, people's attention, and God has a way of helping people. And if the state government were to kill him um, through lethal injection, that would actually um, really uh, just not be a very good way of dealing with the situation altogether. I just don't really know how to really elaborate on some things I'm talking about. I guess I do feel sad for them, the victims, but I also would like for them to understand that that God has a plan for each and every one of them, and God also has a plan for Nicolas Cruz as well. And so I could talk about demons and how the devil had played a major role in this, and I could go into explaining more scriptures or explaining scriptures on how the devil had a role in all of this, and that's very real, very true. But I think that for now, what we need to do is just sit back and try to just give the situation some time. The best part of this situation is that it's pretty much over at this point. Um, the decision is the decision. Now, what he has the opportunity to do is, well, he doesn't really have this opportunity because there's a saying in the criminal justice system that if you take the deal, you can't appeal. You can't appeal. So he took the deal by pleading guilty. So now he can't appeal. So if he were to have been convicted by a jury, um, he would have had the opportunity to appeal his conviction. But since he took the deal, he's not able to appeal. Um, do I believe that he should have took? Do I believe that he should have took the deal? Well, the reality is to it when you look at there was just way too much evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and this was a slam dunk case from the get go because there were just way too many witnesses, there were way too much surveillance, and there was just way too much evidence to say that he did do this. And so, for the prosecution perspective, this was a slam dunk case. And from a defense perspective, when you got a prosecution who says basically we got a slam dunk, slam dunk case. In other words, there's not a whole lot that the defense can come up with to say, "Hey, my client couldn't have done this." So when you're an attorney and you've got a situation where your client really has no wiggle room around trying to debunk what the prosecution is saying, uh, and about the only thing you can do with a situation like that is to offer them a deal and strike a deal with the prosecution, and that's exactly what happened. Um, do I think that the I really look at it this way too, and in the state of Indiana where I'm from, um, usually when a person, like, say, pleads guilty to 3 counts of murder, usually the case doesn't go to a jury to make a decision on about, like, what the sentencing is going to be. If they pled guilty, it ends up being ultimately the judge's decision on what the person's going to get. And usually, when they plead guilty, they sentence the person right then and there. But Indiana is different from Florida, so I look at it like this: if Florida wants to make their situation or laws where a person in a high profile case like this has to go for 3 months. Oh, God. 3 or 4 months of court hearings, daily court hearings of, like, basically a 3 or 4 month long trial of a sentencing trial, which is stupid. This is just me saying this. Then whatever Florida wants to do is whatever Florida's business is. People in Indiana, judges up here in Indiana, are not going to spend, or let's put it this way, waste so much money on having a sentencing trial that lasts for 2 or 3 months, where you got people get up there, or a sentencing trial that lasts 3 days because there's 3 victims in the case, or whatever the case may be, and blah blah blah. So the judge will just go ahead and sentence the person right then and there and tell them, like, hey, you pled guilty to 3 murders, you're getting 65 years times 3. That's what the sentencing guidelines are for Indiana. But if they plead guilty to murder in Indiana, they usually get 45 years if they plead guilty. So it'd be like 45 times 3 would be like what they would get here in Indiana. So, like I said, if Florida wants to do their own thing, that's their business. There's nothing that any of the judges up here in Indiana can tell the people in Florida, like, hey, you're doing this all wrong. We do this up here. Each state is different, so that's just the way that is. That's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. So, I just hope I can give you guys some insight on what my perspective is about Nikolas Cruz, and my perspective on what I feel about the victims. And and I just think that the victims just don't have an understanding of, like, that it's not about what they want. It's about what is just according to what the mitigating factors are. And I absolutely agree with what the jury made their decision. I love it. I really don't think that it's the right thing to sentence somebody to death, even when there's people who have killed way more people than what he has killed, and they're serving the rest of their life. And if you look at the sentencing standards in Europe, um, European prisons are way better than United States prisons by a long shot, because at least in Europe, a person who kills two people, three people, um, often will end up getting out of prison within like 15 years. And that's what happens in Europe. And oftentimes, people, when they get out of prison after 15 years in Europe, they're a whole lot more rehabilitated than people who get out of prison here in the United States. So, maybe I can make a video talking about European prisons in the future. Maybe so, maybe not. But think about some of the things I was saying and comment and subscribe below. Thank you, guys. Clown Underground signing off.